Experiencing a level of pain, unlike any other, brings the immediate realization that life is about to become exceptionally difficult. Prince William had mentally prepared himself for challenging discussions with his father, yet nothing could have readied him for the official document placed between them. King Charles had executed a decision capable of completely reshaping the immediate trajectory of the British monarchy. Catherine would now be crowned months earlier than originally scheduled. As the meaning of those words registered, the future king lost his composure, and the tears he tried to conceal laid bare the profound magnitude of the moment. King Charles quietly observed his son as a heavy silence filled the room. The monarch had signed a formal royal directive, an authoritative written order moving Catherine's scheduled crowning ceremony forward by several months. This was far more than a minor administrative adjustment. The decree instantly elevated her constitutional standing alongside William, as the palace braced for an accelerated transition. William had walked into the meeting, expecting a standard briefing on upcoming royal engagements. Instead, his father slid the signed pages across the desk, quietly stating that Catherine's moment had arrived much sooner than either of them had anticipated. He read the final paragraph twice, his fingers gripping the paper tightly. Turning away for a moment, he fought to regain his composure before acknowledging the immense, unspoken pressures his wife had been carrying out of the public eye. The shock intensified when he reached the concluding directive. Preparations were already underway. A covert planning group operating under direct orders from the king had been quietly managing briefings, ceremonial duties, and the compressed timeline in total secrecy. The crowning ceremony was no longer a distant prospective event. It had transformed into an active, operational priority behind palace doors. Noticing the shift in emotion, Charles spoke with a gentler tone. He explained to William that this decision was not made simply because Catherine was capable of wearing a crown or undertaking a ceremony, but because she had already been acting as though the weight of the monarchy's future rested on her shoulders. The king had watched her navigate pressure, protect her family, and maintain remarkable composure during times of uncertainty. Then came the most daunting detail. Catherine was still unaware of the full scope of the decision. William looked down at the directive, realizing he would have to deliver the news to her himself. The emotion in the room reflected deep responsibility, devotion, and a future arriving far sooner than expected. When William finally faced Catherine with the document in hand, those initial tears marked only the beginning of a life-changing day. Catherine sensed something was wrong before William even spoke. He entered the room carrying an expression she recognized from the most challenging chapters of their royal lives, the look of a man desperate to shield his family while knowing complete protection was impossible. Yet there was no scandal, confrontation, or family rift awaiting them. There was only a crown, a revised timeline, and a future rapidly descending upon them both. William carried the signed decree into the room without immediately handing it over. He understood the profound implications of an accelerated schedule because royal succession had always bound Catherine's public evolution directly to his own. Until this moment, much of that preparation belonged to a distant chapter. Suddenly, every appearance, family decision, and public choice would be evaluated against the high expectations of a crowned royal role arriving far ahead of schedule. Catherine watched as he placed the document on the table. The visible strain around his eyes revealed the severity of the news well before she read the official text. No aides or secretaries were present. Looking directly at her husband, she asked just 2 words, "How soon?" William answered carefully, explaining that months had been carved out of the original schedule. The ceremony was now imminent, and formal preparations were already active. Catherine remained completely still. There was no celebration, excitement, or display of triumph. Her immediate thoughts turned to their children, the impact on their personal life, and the additional strain it would place on William as he balanced supporting her with his own expanding royal duties. Then William shared the detail that altered the tone entirely. King Charles had not merely approved a staff proposal, but had personally ordered the acceleration. The king had personally pushed for the expedited timeline and instructed that Catherine receive immediate, private ceremonial briefings to cover complex duties much earlier than anticipated. Catherine reached across the table, bypassing the document to take William's hand. In a steady, controlled voice, she assured him she would fulfill whatever duty was required, but insisted they would not allow the institution to drive them into isolated roles. If this future was arriving early, they would face it as a team. William felt a wave of anxiety lift, yet one lingering question remained. Catherine looked back at the directive and then at her husband, asking why this was happening now. He had no answer, as the true explanation lay not in the paperwork, but in a private moment weeks prior that had permanently altered the king's perception of her. Major historic decisions often stem from quiet, unscripted moments when uncertainty gives way to absolute conviction. For Charles, that moment did not occur within a formal council meeting or through constitutional briefings. It happened during an intimate royal gathering when Catherine was forced to handle an unexpected crisis without preparation. Her composure during those crucial minutes left an indelible impression on the king, ultimately serving as the catalyst for his extraordinary decision. Charles had been evaluating Catherine's long-term ceremonial trajectory for weeks, but had hesitated to rush the process, knowing that altering a coronation schedule could spark public speculation regarding motives and pressure. He required absolute certainty before acting, aware that palace directives cannot easily be undone once initiated. Then an incident at Windsor altered everything. During a private reception for senior Commonwealth representatives, an unexpected logistical failure delayed Charles ahead of an important closed-door session. As staff scrambled to manage the delay, the delegates were left waiting, and the atmosphere grew uncertain. Sensing the tension, Catherine stepped forward on her own initiative before anyone could request her help. She entered the room alone, greeting the guests with calm authority. Rather than ignoring the delay or relying on superficial pleasantries, she effortlessly led the conversation, engaged the delegates, and maintained a steady atmosphere until the king arrived. The Commonwealth, a voluntary association of nations tied to Britain, remains vital to the crown, relying heavily on trust and diplomatic continuity. Arriving at the room, Charles paused outside and watched the final moments unseen. He observed that Catherine was not seeking attention. She was deliberately directing focus toward the guests, ensuring they felt valued while the household recovered from an operational oversight. That selflessness resonated deeply with the king. Later that evening, William shared a detail Catherine had kept hidden. She had been terrified before entering the room, but refused to show it because the family could not appear hesitant in front of international guests. Charles listened quietly, realizing the deeper strength behind the calm demeanor he had witnessed. The following morning, Charles requested the existing ceremonial schedule, the first subtle step toward his eventual decree. He convened a confidential discussion with a select group of advisors to address a single question. Should arbitrary tradition dictate when Catherine was ready, or should demonstrated readiness dictate the timeline? William remained unaware of these deliberations. What Charles viewed as proof of readiness, William would initially interpret as an overwhelming demand, leading father and son into a direct, emotional confrontation. William returned to see his father not as an heir carrying out protocol, but as a protective husband. The decree had been signed, Catherine had been informed, and preparations were underway, yet William was consumed by one question. Why had Charles compressed months of preparation into a matter of weeks, and had anyone evaluated the personal toll on the woman expected to bear it? Closing the office door, William set the royal directive back on the desk. He was not contesting Catherine's future position, as he had always known her role would expand alongside his. His concern centered entirely on the extreme speed. The formal order had turned future expectations into immediate demands, raising his fear that duty was eclipsing the human element. Charles looked at the document on the desk without picking it up, fully understanding his son's concern, yet viewing the situation through a different lens. He argued that delaying formal recognition simply because the duty was heavy would not protect Catherine. Instead, it would risk underestimating the exceptional capability she had already demonstrated. William's frustration surfaced as he asked whether the timeline was being moved forward because the monarchy truly required Catherine's leadership now, or because Charles feared that time was running out faster than anyone cared to admit. The question carried immense weight. He saw the king tense as a moment of regret crossed his face, yet William stood his ground. Charles responded firmly, reminding William that Catherine had spent years handling immense pressure without ever asking for concessions. His tone then softened as he noted that he had watched William attempt to shoulder every burden alone out of a desire to shield his wife. However, the king cautioned that love could inadvertently become a barrier if it prevented her from stepping into an authority she had rightfully earned. Charles then revealed the details of the Windsor reception, describing in a private account for the family archives how he had watched Catherine manage the room completely unaware of his presence. That single moment, he explained, had solidified his conviction. William stood in silence as he realized the decision was far from impulsive. His father had spent weeks reviewing schedules, consulting trusted advisors, and ensuring that Catherine's composure under pressure was a permanent trait rather than a temporary effort. The quiet that followed carried far more weight than their initial debate. William had arrived prepared to contest a rushed decision, only to discover that Charles had already begun shifting core ceremonial responsibilities toward Catherine well before the crowning itself. While William had entered the room fearing a rushed timeline, he left with a far more profound realization. The transition of power was already underway. The public might eventually witness a grand ceremony, a crown, and formal royal processions, but behind palace walls, Catherine's elevation was beginning in much quieter ways through updated briefing files, revised seating arrangements, and direct access to high-level discussions she once attended only at William's side. Charles was not simply moving a date forward. He was actively redistributing structural responsibility. Catherine was authorized to join key strategic meetings weeks ahead of schedule. Charles was not placing her above William or creating competing centers of power, but was instead reinforcing the core working partnership through which the couple would eventually manage major state duties together. What was once distant preparation had instantly become active governance, altering the atmosphere around them both. Catherine felt the weight of the shift immediately, privately expressing to William her concern that palace staff might misinterpret the change as personal ambition, particularly those accustomed to a much slower transition. William offered reassurance while remaining mindful of the internal dynamics, knowing that subtle promotions can easily generate quiet friction within traditional structures. Attending her first expanded briefing, Catherine focused on listening carefully. Partway through an advisor's presentation, she paused the discussion to ask if any staff members would lose their existing responsibilities as a result of her expanded role. The room went quiet. She was not asking about rank or precedence, but about the impact on individuals, demonstrating her clear understanding that structural changes carry real human consequences. The advisor then shared another key detail. King Charles had explicitly instructed officials that these sessions were not to be treated as mere practice. Catherine was not present simply to observe protocol, but was expected to offer insights, challenge assumptions, and participate directly in decision-making. The transition from preparation to actual authority was complete. Shortly after, William discovered that his father had ordered a confidential review of major duties typically reserved for much later stage, confirming that the accelerated ceremony was merely the visible surface of a far deeper institutional shift. Catherine reviewed her updated schedule, closed the folder in thought, and turned to William, stating with quiet resolve that they would execute the duty properly. Her initial hesitation had transformed into firm determination, with the new structure set to manifest through her taking on major responsibilities far earlier than expected. The broader palace quickly picked up on the changing dynamic without needing an official announcement. Staff noticed her name rising on high-level briefing sheets, doors opening sooner, and meetings once designated as future planning quietly turning into immediate operations. The reality became undeniable when Catherine arrived for a senior ceremonial briefing weeks before anyone outside the inner circle expected her presence. Her arrival signaled that departments responsible for event coordination were now working under a compressed schedule, converting months of planning into weeks. The accelerated pace carried added significance because the king had placed his personal authority behind it, turning routine preparation into a test of institutional efficiency. As senior staff stood upon her entry, Catherine sat down and quietly requested that they not treat her any differently overnight. Her words were gracious, yet the underlying gravity was clear. She was determined not to let rising formal ceremony create distance between herself and those tasked with supporting her work. Away from official meetings, William witnessed the personal toll of the transition. One evening, he found Catherine staring blankly at a single briefing page, exhausted from the continuous demands. Sitting beside her in silence, the future king confronted his own helplessness, watching the very pressure he had hoped to spare her from begin to take its toll. Meanwhile, when advisors suggested slowing the pace, Charles refused, maintaining that pausing after preparations had become public knowledge would cause far more instability than proceeding as planned. In his view, hesitation carried greater risk than momentum. Eventually, the strict secrecy began to slip as a draft schedule circulated beyond the core planning group to the wider royal household. While the document omitted specific details, it clearly indicated that Catherine's elevated position was arriving much sooner than anticipated. Upon receiving warning of the leak, Charles calmly set his glasses down, reviewed the page, and instructed his team to proceed with the schedule. William understood the implication. The confidential phase had ended, and with public discovery imminent, he sat down with Catherine to ask the one question no one else had raised. Did she truly want to move forward with this timeline now? For days, everyone had evaluated Catherine's readiness except Catherine herself. Advisors analyzed protocol, Charles focused on stability, William worried about the emotional burden, and palace planners managed the calendar. Yet when husband and wife spoke privately, the matter came down to a single personal choice. If the ceremony could still be delayed, would she request more time or step forward now? Catherine fully understood the sacrifices involved. Her schedule would intensify, personal time would shrink, and every public action would carry immense weight as the responsibilities of the crown began shaping her life far earlier than planned. Recognizing the immense momentum within the palace, William refused to let circumstance force her hand. Speaking simply as her husband rather than the heir to the throne, he promised that if she wanted to pause the process, he he would personally approach Charles to request a postponement, insisting that her personal well-being came before institutional expectations. Catherine openly acknowledged her quiet anxieties, including the fear of public missteps, the impact of the condensed schedule on their children, and the concern that the public might focus solely on her new status, while overlooking the years of dedicated work that brought her to this point. William felt deeply moved, admitting his constant instinct had been to shield her, even if it meant taking on decisions on her behalf. For the first time, he recognized that overprotection could inadvertently limit her autonomy to embrace her own responsibilities. When faced with the final choice, Catherine remained firm, stating she would not ask the king to reverse his directive. Charles had placed his full trust in her, and asking him to step back would signal a lack of confidence in the very faith he had shown. Her decision transformed William's perspective entirely. What had initially felt like an imposed burden was now a responsibility she had chosen to embrace. While the quiet understanding between them brought relief, the broader public reaction was about to begin as news of the decree leaked to the press. By sunrise, the confidential directive had become the central news story across the nation. Television broadcasts shifted their coverage, newspapers overhauled their front pages, and crowds gathered outside royal residences seeking confirmation. Amid the media frenzy, a single image captured the true narrative: William and Catherine arriving together, composed and united, fully aware that the public was now learning what they had processed in private. Catherine felt the magnitude of the moment before her day even began. The accelerated timeline was no longer a private palace strategy, but an international headline driving speculation about why Charles had acted so early, what the decision revealed about his trust in her, and how it reshaped expectations for William's future reign. Front-page headlines displayed images of Catherine alongside William, flanked by photos of Charles signing official documents. She reviewed the papers briefly before setting them aside, while William quietly asked if she was ready. Taking a moment to steady herself, Catherine looked at him and noted that there was no turning back now, fully aware that every upcoming appearance would be evaluated against her new elevated standing. Outside Buckingham Palace, public interest mounted as onlookers gathered at the gates to follow rolling news updates, sensing they were witnessing a pivotal chapter in modern royal history. Analysis focused heavily on King Charles, emphasizing that he had personally initiated the change rather than merely approving a staff recommendation, transforming Catherine's advancement into an intentional statement on the future of the monarchy. When William and Catherine appeared together later that day, their calm, unified presence immediately dispelled rumors of internal division. The public had reacted, Catherine had chosen, and William had stood by her, leaving only the king to explain the broader purpose behind his decision. What began with William in tears over an unexpected directive, Catherine questioning her readiness, and Charles defending a sudden shift ultimately concluded with a profound sense of unity. There were no longer arguments, hidden agendas, or doubts about the rapid pace. Only three key figures aligned in their purpose, recognizing that the crown's most critical transitions are built on mutual trust rather than mere ceremony. Charles gathered William and Catherine privately following the public announcement to resolve any lingering emotional strain. The king reiterated that advancing the ceremony was never intended to disrupt tradition, but to formally align her official status with the substantial responsibilities she was already managing. Setting the original signed decree before them, Charles turned to Catherine and stated that the document derived its true value solely from the person expected to fulfill it, handing the pages directly to her. The gesture was deeply symbolic, representing a direct transfer of trust and responsibility into her hands. Catherine accepted the moment with quiet dignity, expressing her gratitude while emphasizing that she viewed the elevation not as a personal reward, but as a solemn duty shared with her husband, their family, and the public. Having previously wondered if the title would define her, she now understood that her true task was to define how she would carry the responsibility. William watched the exchange with deep pride, realizing his initial tears of fear had transformed into profound respect. He had spent days worrying whether Catherine could manage the upcoming demands, only to realize she had willingly embraced them long before formal approval was granted. Charles reflected once more on the Windsor reception, reiterating that watching her navigate that challenging room with quiet authority had proven she possessed the poise required for the role, regardless of official schedules. The decision was fully settled. William accepted the timeline, Catherine embraced the responsibility, and Charles had secured the future of the monarchy while he had the opportunity to shape it. William's initial tears had begun out of fear of a sudden future, but concluded with the realization that Catherine had been ready for that